Welcome to session number 9 in the Anglican tradition series here. What I'd like to focus on today is a fallacy which has often crept into the life of the church and dominates certain forms of Christianity. We'll call this the Constintinian fall fallacy. There's a particular way of interpreting church history which is highly problematic, but it dominates many groups within Christianity in terms of their view of the faith journey, and the consequence of that is then the people who buy into this particular perspective then lack any interest in church history itself and what it means. And we can call this the Constantinian fall fallacy. The Constantinian fall fallacy goes like this, basically. There was the early church, which we find embodied and encoded in the Bible, and this was a period of time when the red heat of Christians was intense. They were willing to die for their faith. They were the truest to Christ. The disciples were willing to die also. They took serious leadership. Christianity spread quickly from the Mediterranean and different parts going east and west in the world. And so there was no doubt that faith burned at a unique pitch, and this is the primitive church, the church at its best, its noblest, its most preferred. With the coming when Christ ascended, when the disciples died, you get the post-apostolic area, and there was a cooling off somewhat, but still they were close enough to the period of the disciples that they still had inherited and taken the torch that was given to them. The problem, of course, from the Constantinian fall thesis is that increasingly, with the growth of Christianity in the late antique world, Christians were coming from a variety of classes, backgrounds, and a slow assimilation into the bigger culture began. And as Christianity grew numerically, it was having a greater influence, not only in the Roman world at the time, but beyond that. Those in power gradually came to see that, in fact, Christianity was the form of religion that they should make the state religion. Constantine in the 4th century came to power, and in the position of power that he took, he had a vision of being about to go to war. In fact, he saw a cross in his dream, and he interpreted the cross to mean that if he followed and was sensitive to the Christians, in fact, he would win this war. He particularly won the battle, and he then made Christianity the state religion of the waning Roman Empire. And this is what's called the Constantinian fall thesis. So you have the pure early church, the cooling off, and then when the state made Christianity the state religion, the argument is, of course, that most Christians had to compromise to be part of the ruling elite of the Roman Empire, and that heat that once burned so bright had waned, and it was merely cool embers. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that both the Western and Eastern mothers and fathers never bought in to the Constantinian fall perspective. In fact, they argued, and they were very critical of the fact when if Constantine thought he could control the church and dominate the church, and the church was merely to become a lapdog for his imperial and political purposes. And so even though Eusebius's great speech to Constantine seemed to reaffirm the fact that this man was given to the church as a gift to God to end the martyrdom, the violence that many Christians had suffered, there were many others within the church who we recognize as the saints and the mothers and the fathers of the church who raised serious questions about that. So whether in the West, for example, Ambrose's confrontation with Theodosius, who was the emperor of the time, he was when Theodosius went into Thessalonica and slaughtered thousands of people. It was Ambrose who refused to allow the emperor to come into the cathedral in Milan. Whether it's John Chrysostom in the East who was willing to stand up the emperor and empress and went into exile for doing so. There's a whole variety of the leading bishops and priests and lay people at this period of time who were quite willing to challenge the Constantinian perspective. And so in many ways it has to be seen as a fallacy that somehow the church had assimilated to power, had assimilated to political influence, to the emperors, and it really was silent in terms of the large issues. And so those who buy into this Constantinian fall fallacy, their argument is, then why would I even care about the patristic era, because these are a bunch of men and women who totally compromised their faith for privilege and power. Those who see, in fact, the mothers and fathers as challenging that, we have very different models of what the church could be, and I'll be dealing with that a little later.